What's poppin', team? Welcome to another episode of the Master Your Craft Study. First of all, I have to do our listener shout out. This week's listener spotlight goes to Steve Nobles. I actually know Steve personally, but he's been giving tremendous support, and on the last couple episodes, he has left several reviews, almost all along the lines of great job, guys. Really appreciate the work and the wisdom. So Steve, thank you so much. If you're listening, I really appreciate your support in this process. It's been great. Steve is the head coach for the basketball team at the Academy of Richmond County High School in Augusta. So each week I'm going to be fielding questions. Anyone that wants to submit a question can send an email to questions@myc.team. That's questions@myc.team. I will do my best to answer as many of them as possible. We only had 3 or 4 last week, but I do have one I wanted to share. This week's is from Dave in California, and he says, "What's your favorite episode so far?" If I have to be honest, and this is difficult because I quite literally have podcast episodes with family and great friends that are already released, but I think it's the one that you're about to hear. Our guest today is Alan Stein. Alan is someone that I've looked up to for a really long time, both personally and professionally. He's a performance coach, consultant, speaker, and author. He spent 15 years working with the highest performing basketball players on the planet. You can see pictures of them all over the internet with KD, Steph Curry, LeBron, Chris Paul, Kobe, Anthony Davis, John Wall, Kyrie. He's a very well-rounded individual that has worked with some really high-level players. He delivers keynotes and interactive workshops to improve performance, cohesion, and accountability. He used to work primarily with basketball teams and players, and was a strength coach at DeMatha High School, which is a high school powerhouse. But now he's moved off onto his own and does a lot of the different things that he learned along the way with businesses. So he's turned some of his knowledge as a basketball coach and trainer and inspiration into something he can deliver to businesses. In other words, Alan teaches you how to utilize the same strategies in business that elite athletes use to perform at a world-class level. I'm glad to call Alan a friend, and I'm excited to see where his career goes in the next couple of years. I truly believe there's big things in store. All right, that's enough. Without further delay, here's my conversation with Alan Stein. Alan, welcome to the Master Your Craft Study. Thanks for coming on, my man.
Hey, thanks, Jacob. I'm excited to be here.
I just want to start out, kind of let everyone know that Alan actually embodies essentially the entire purpose of this study. Everything that Alan could probably offer us in wisdom today, he's working on many, many years of being around athletic excellence when it comes to players and coaches that I'm just now starting to scratch the surface on. So if you want a real picture painted for you of what athletic excellence is from someone who's been around it for most of their adult life, Alan is definitely the guy to go see. So right off the bat, tell us a little bit, Alan. Basketball performance coach, and now venturing into some new stuff. What do you got going on?
Man, you set the bar really high for this conversation. I love it. I appreciate that very much. I wouldn't want it any other way. Basketball has been my number one passion for as long as I can remember. And I played as a kid and did a multitude of different sports and activities, but basketball was always what I came back to. Fast forward to my adult life, I'm very fortunate that I made most of my career in that space as a performance coach, which most people used to call a strength and conditioning coach. So I would help players improve their on-court athleticism and movement efficiency, and did that for almost 20 years before I decided to make the leap over to the corporate space, which is what I do now, which is really teaching folks in the business world how to improve their performance using the same habits and mindsets and rituals and disciplines and routines that elite coaches and players use. So I'm still very involved in the game of basketball. I'm just coming at it from a different vantage point now. But it all goes back to improving performance.
Yeah, that's incredible. I think that field is obviously growing with the amount of impact that you can have from a digital standpoint. You can reach a lot of different people, especially if you have a good message. And I think there's still a lot of room for people to connect sports and business. And that's something you're doing now that a few other people are doing, but the parallels are incredible. Let's actually speak on that for a second right now. I heard you in an interview just recently you did with, was it Coach Burt, I believe? And you talked about preparation and how that's one of the big carryovers between sports and business. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Because I think that gets lost on a lot of young players and young coaches that tend to see the final picture, the final image or final product, and don't see a lot of what happens behind the scenes.
For sure. First of all, every day that I get further entrenched in this, I'm amazed and excited by how much crossover there really is between what it takes to be elite in sport and what it takes to be elite in business. And you just hit on a couple of really important themes, one of which is respecting the process and trusting the process. And that's ultimately what preparation is. And the other that you just so perfectly mentioned was the unseen hours, the things that go on when no one else is watching. If you were to flip on an NBA game tonight, I know the season's over, but if you flipped on a game and you saw Curry or LeBron or one of those guys drop 40, you don't really have a strong appreciation for the countless hours they spent in an empty gym to put them in the position to do that. And it's the same thing in business. If I'm going to give a proposal or send a proposal or make a presentation to your company, that's kind of the game. But whether or not that proposal or presentation will be successful is built upon the hours and hours and hours of preparation when no one else was watching. So those two things are incredibly important. And high achievers and high performers recognize that, and they own that, and they understand that, and they really invest heavily into developing solid habits during the unseen hours, so that when the lights come on and the cheerleaders start dancing, they're able to perform at the best of their ability.
And you've worked with some of the best athletes I would consider in the country, or even in the history of the game of basketball. And I know that you could go into details on stories of having worked with Kobe or KD or some of these ultra high level athletes. And maybe if you want to touch on one of those stories, that'd be great. But one of the things I'd like you to point out, if you can, is some of the specific characteristics or attributes of those players that some young players or young coaches right now could take with them as the key points to take away from that. It's easy to see Kobe doing a workout. It's harder to see what it was that made that workout great.
For sure. Well, if somebody follows my work, the Kobe story that I tell about, an early morning gym workout and mastering the basics, and I've even told the Kevin Durant story a lot of times about the first time that I worked him out. If someone were to search some of my work, they'd find those pretty easily. So what I'd like to do with you is tell a story that I haven't told as often or as publicly, and that was the time I had a chance to meet Steve Nash. And nice. Steve Nash is probably my favorite player of all time that I don't have a personal relationship with. And there was a Nike Skills Academy that was named after him in the same vein as Kobe Bryant. And I got to spend some time with him after he talked to the campers and was blown away by his perspective. And there was a few things that I remember specifically about that conversation. One, he said, if you ever see me do something in a game, that looks like I pulled it out of thin air, looks like it was borderline a magician's trick, just know that that's not the first time I've done that I've practiced that for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of repetitions. And while it may be a running wrong foot layup that looks like he just came up with it, he said, no, man, I've done that, hundreds and hundreds of times in empty gyms. And he even said it at that point when I was talking to him, that the way he would finish every single off-season workout was he would find one difficult finish around the basket. So maybe it's a reverse layup with the offhand or whatever, a floater. He would take one finish and he would do it 100 consecutive times before he left the gym. That was kind of his ticket to leave the workout, was to do something out of the box 100 times, which meant therefore the next season when he does that move and we're all, mind blown by it, he's done it before. So that was one thing that I thought was really, really cool. The other was, especially at the NBA level, if you study the analytics, when you get the ball in the paint, either by the pass or by the drive, teams score at a much higher percentage rate. Even if they don't score in the paint, but any good basketball player will tell you how important ball movement is. And if you get the ball in the paint and then you kick it out for a three, that's a much higher percentage three-point shot than just coming down and jacking it up off the dribble. So he said his number one goal as the floor general and as the point guard was to make sure that the ball got into the paint every possession. And then he said for him personally, he wanted to make sure that when he got the ball into the paint, especially off the dribble, that he had as many options at his disposal as possible. So he wanted to make sure that he could dribble with either hand, that he could pass with either hand, that he could finish around the basket with either hand, so that no one could limit his options. He could pivot forward and backward off of either foot. He could hit a jump shot. He could pass it to the big man. He could kick it out for a three, because he felt the more options he had, the harder he was to guard. So that was why he worked relentlessly on being as close to about ambidextrous as you can be for a basketball player. But it was all about goal number one is get the ball in the paint. Goal number two is have unlimited options on where he can beat the defense. And hopefully someone listening to this can extrapolate that mindset into the business world and into other areas of our life. Know exactly what your primary goal is and your primary purpose, and then make sure that you've got as many options to fulfill that as possible, and you're as well versed as you can be without limiting, what you're really, really strong at and what you're good at.
Right. I wonder what it was, and maybe it's a trainer. So we'll take it here. Maybe it's a trainer that Steve Nash had that would kind of tip him off to be such a task-oriented athlete. Obviously, at that point in his career, he was years into his training. But early on, coaches and trainers and mentors play a massive role in kind of guiding you down that path. And I know just recently you did a little 94-foot walkabout with Jay Billis as well. And you mentioned that he was someone you've looked up to, and he's played a bit of a mentor role for you. Talk about mentors, trainers, or coaches and the kind of impact they can have on setting a student straight early on.
Well, one thing that I find remarkable is it's not just the early on part, it's for the rest of your life. And the most successful people I've ever met, the highest performers, the best players I've ever met, still have coaches, still have mentors. I remember way back when Tiger Woods was the Tiger Woods in golf and how dominant he was. I mean, he was one of the most dominant athletes on the planet during his run. And he talked about how important it was for him to have a coach. And even though he was, he had probably already achieved 99.5% of what he was capable of, he hired a coach to help him get that last 0.5%.
Fill the gaps.
Take a guy like LeBron now. LeBron has a personal trainer. LeBron has a shooting coach. LeBron has a massage therapist. He has a physical he has all of these folks above and beyond what the Cavaliers provide for him. So, Tom Brady's the same way. I mean, these folks all constantly have coaches, which I put in the same realm as a mentor, as a trainer. They have people in their lives that they know can push them and help them get to a level that they can't get to by themselves. And while these are some of the most confident people you will ever meet, thankfully they have enough humility to realize that no matter how good they are, they can still get a little bit better. And that often means they need someone else to help them get a little bit better. That story that I tell about Kobe Bryant, what often gets glossed over was he wasn't in the gym by himself. His trainer was taking him through a workout. And same thing with any of the great players. They have someone in their corner always pushing them and taking them to a level that they can't get to on their own. And that's something all of us should be doing.
Yeah. So both as from a receptive point. So if you're a player, you should be seeking out or receptive to the people that are offering their services or their knowledge to you. And then on the flip side, for those of you who you could be in your fourth or fifth year of a profession or of, say, coaching or training, and you feel like you're still young in the game, but that doesn't mean you also couldn't turn around and pay it forward. And for the first and second year coaches, you probably have a lot you can offer. And giving someone that amount of time or that amount of energy to try to teach them or mentor them is a really big deal. So young coaches listening, especially if you're right in that gap, make sure you're looking forward and trying to find people you can learn from, but then also looking back and seeing who it is you can kind of pick up and help up the ladder at this point as well.
You teed that up perfectly. I had a chance to spend some time with a gentleman named Frank Shamrock, who, if anybody listening was a big fan of the UFC back in the 90s, Frank Shamrock and his brother Ken Shamrock are really the ones that put UFC and MMA on the map. I mean, they were the best in the world at that sport before it became the billion-dollar behemoth that it is now. And if you Google, Frank Shamrock was one of the baddest dudes on the planet of all time. And he's a really, really great guy. And he shared this with me, and I don't know if this is something he made up or if he got it from someone else, but this lends to what you just said. He calls it the plus equal minus system. And he said that you should always have three people in your life at all times. One person is your plus. That's the person that you would consider your mentor. They've already walked the path that you want to go down. They've already accomplished things that you want to accomplish, and you're hoping that they'll, reach a hand back down and help mentor you. Then he said you want to have an equal. That's a peer, somebody that's about the same level as you, but has the same goals and aspirations and drive. And that's somebody that you can, commiserate with when things don't go as well, but you can also celebrate and share your successes, as well as just exchange best practices. And then lastly, he said you also need to have a minus. And he doesn't say minus in a diminishing way. he says that's the person that's a few years behind you that you need to send the elevator back down for and help them and help them reach, maybe what it is that you've achieved. And he said, and I found this in my own experience, you actually end up learning a great deal when you're the plus and you have to teach a minus, because in order for you to teach or mentor anyone, you have to know that stuff incredibly well. So it keeps you really sharp. So having those three people in your life at all times, I think is a great recipe for any of us. And one other point that I'll make on that is, I think lots of times people, they take age into play, and they think that a mentor is going to be older than them and somebody that they help is going to be younger than them. And chronological age really doesn't have a lot to do with it. I mean, certainly there's value in life experience, but in order to be more specific, it has to be in the domain that you're trying to improve. I mean, Drew Hanlon, who's an NBA skills coach and a good friend of mine, I think he's the best skills coach in the world. He's 15 years younger than I am, and yet he mentors me on certain aspects where he has more experience. Same thing in the speaking business now. I have folks that I can help mentor that are actually older than I am chronologically, but it's only because I've been doing something longer than they have. So don't think that it has to fall into these boxes that your plus has to be older, your equal has to be the same age, and the minus has to be younger. It may turn out that way, but it doesn't have to.
Let's talk about Drew for a second. So Drew went to Belmont. I went to Mercer. Until they left for the conference change, we were conference rivals for a couple of years, and I got to square off against them. But him and Ian Clark were a little bit too much for the Mercer Bears. And but I was always fond of his game, and I'm shocked at how much of a training career and how incredible that process has gone for him as compared to an already impressive playing career. And I think that as a trainer, he's really showing us how impactful you can be in a field if you care, to quote something that you said about him. Talk more about Drew. What makes Drew an incredible trainer? Because I think he's probably one of the best to do it right now.
Oh, he absolutely is. And there's so many factors that go into his success. He has one of the most relentless work ethics of anyone that I've ever met in any walk of life. I mean, this is his purpose. This is his calling. This is his why. And he pours everything into it. He pays very close attention to every detail. I don't know that there's anyone on the planet that watches as much film as he does to improve his craft, but also to get his players better. I think Drew's major advantage is the fact that, one, he was an elite level player. So he has empathy for his players. I mean, he knows what it takes to be in the upper 1% of all basketball players. He knows it from a sacrifice standpoint. He knows it from a work ethic standpoint. And he's allowed that to turn himself into an incredibly gifted coach and trainer. And that's not saying that you have to have been an elite level player in order to be a good coach or trainer, but I think it adds value and it definitely helps in certain areas. And, Drew knew exactly what it took to get him to play at a high level, which is game specific drills and, more importantly, teaching actual skills. And that's what he does with his guys. So he doesn't get caught up in very much fluff. He's not really about the sizzle. He's much more about the steak and doing exactly what it is that players need to do to get better. Drew is also incredibly authentic and very honest. He will tell a player, he'll look at his players, and because he's established trust and because he cares about them, he will tell them without very much sugarcoating, what's wrong with their game or what they need to fix or if they do a move correctly. And, a lot of people would call that tough love, but Drew's a straight shooter because, one, he knows what he's talking about. And two, he really, really cares about his guys. They're not dollar figures to him. They're just not names on a resume. Those guys, he really cares about them. And I've seen that countless times. And he's the one that came up with the term unseen hours. What he does behind the scenes to help his guys is remarkable. So anything you may see on social media or hear about him, that's only a fraction of what he actually pours in to his players. And all of that kind of combined is why he's so great. And I will say too that Drew fascinates me because, and I give him a hard time all the time, that he's incredibly confident. He's one of the most confident people I've ever met. But he has just enough of the humility to realize, that he still has things to learn and that he can still be mentored and get better. So yeah, Drew is someone that has helped me a lot. Again, even though I'm 15 years his senior.
Yeah, that's incredible. I think think that he's one of the people we could learn a lot from right now, because he is in a scenario where he's very transparent with a lot of the different work he's doing. He's got a great media crew, and obviously that's what we see. We're only seeing the final product there. But I do think that they promote some of the right stuff. The fact that there are series and different blog posts are talking about the unseen hours. I'm a huge advocate for promoting the right way to do it. And I think that Drew, and you have as well, Alan, that's one reason that I was so excited to get you on the show, because that is the sort of thing that needs to be popular, that needs to be sent viral on the internet, rather than a lot of the stuff that's largely promotional and or egotistical behavior that we're seeing on a far end of the spectrum. You've seen a lot of different athletes, a lot of different trainers, a lot of different coaches, and what their process has been in pursuit of craft mastery. What are some of the fears and anxieties or downfalls that people have? If you don't want to be specific about a name, but would be willing to share a story, I think that there are probably some dark moments that people could learn from, for sure.
Well, I mean, I'll speak in the first person and speak from my own experience. And I do know firsthand that a lot of my colleagues and other trainers and coaches and speakers in this case feel the same way. No matter how confident you are and no matter how much preparation you put in, inside of all of us, there'll always still be a small seed of insecurity. Like, am I good enough? Why should someone listen to me? Why should someone train with me? Why? And, you know, the more we prepare and the more we perform and develop confidence, we can keep that little voice at bay. But I do think that's inside of all of us. And, you know, especially in the coaching and in the speaking world, a lot of people, and I know myself, have gone through what you call the imposter syndrome. And you find yourself simply regurgitating stuff that you learned from those that came before you. So maybe you studied a certain trainer, and when you go and do one of your workouts, you're basically mimicking or copycatting what they did. I do think that's somewhat of a rite of passage for young coaches. You know, they tend to coach in the same style and use the same language as the person that heavily influenced them. But then as they get more experience, they develop their own philosophy and their own convictions, and then they start to create something that's very unique to them. I know I went through that initially as a trainer myself, and have had shreds of that in my professional corporate speaking now, where I would study certain people so much, I would find myself quoting them more than I was quoting myself. I was finding speaking and using mannerisms that they use that weren't necessarily authentic to me. And thankfully now I have the self-awareness to be able to catch that very quickly and get back to a place of what I know and stay true to who I am. But I think that's something that happens with all coaches. And even if you talk about somebody like a Coach K, you know, at the pinnacle of his career, he's been doing this for 40 years. I'm willing to bet his first couple of years, he had a lot of similarities to Bobby Knight, who was his mentor and his coach and poured into him. And it took some time for him to kind of be able to separate and find his own path. So I think having a little bit of insecurity and dealing with that imposter syndrome is something a lot of coaches and trainers and anyone trying to, master their craft will probably experience it in varying levels.
Yeah, I think a little bit of insecurity, just a sliver of it in the back of your mind, is not only healthy but necessary, because that little bit of insecurity could be the bug that keeps scratching at you to make sure that you don't lose sense of where you're headed and what direction you need to go. When you would get in,
let me say, I was just going to say with that, I find this fascinating because I'm a terminology guy, and I believe there's a difference between fear and being scared. I think fear and having a little bit of fear is what keeps us sharp. If you were going to walk across a balance beam that was, suspended 1,000 feet in the air, fear would be healthy. You need fear because it would heighten your focus. It would heighten your attention. If you had no fear, you'd be very willy-nilly about crossing that beam. However, when you get scared, I think that's what can paralyze us. That's what can actually inhibit our performance. So, people ask me all the time. Actually, I gave a commencement speech at the local graduation a few weeks ago, and
it was
in front of 4,000 people, and I brought my young children with me. And but 2 hours before we were to start, the whole place was empty. It was down at Constitution Hall in Washington, D.C. And my son Jack said, are all of these seats going to be filled up? And I said, yeah, man, there'll be 4,000 people in here. And he said, are you scared? And I said, oh no, I'm not scared. I have a healthy excitement. I have butterflies. I feel like I'm going to play a big game tonight, but I'm not scared. So I think that was the way for me to communicate to him. There was just a tiny bit of fear in there to keep me sharp. and to make sure that I was ready to do the best I was capable of. But because I'd put in the preparation and I've earned confidence through demonstrated performance, I was definitely not scared to do that.
How do you harness that fear? Or what kind of habits or routines do you go through on a day-to-day basis where you can combat some of that fear or anxiety or adversity when there's something that you need to focus on? How is it that you handle situations like that?
In a few ways. One, I think preparation helps tremendously. The more prepared you feel, the more confident you'll feel, and the less fearful you'll be. So, if right now, if somebody called me and said, "Hey, Alan, you need to give a keynote in 2 hours, just meet us here," my anxiety level would go up because I wouldn't be fully prepared for that, not to the degree I would if it's on my calendar 3 weeks from now. So would I still be able to go out there and do a tap dance and do a decent job? Probably, but I wouldn't be as prepared. So that would certainly be somewhat of a drawback. I also, I don't want to make life sound trivial because it's not. I mean, life is, it's the most important thing that we have. But I do think that everything we do is just another rep. And I don't build things up in my mind. I don't spend a lot of time playing worst case scenario, but in the back of my mind, if for any reason I goofed up at that commencement speech, I'd still be here doing this podcast with you. It's not like my life would have been over. Yes, it would have probably been embarrassing, especially with social media. Maybe a video could have gone viral of me making a mistake or, having my fly down or something goofy like that. But it's not going to end you. It's just another learning experience. And I've learned to be able to disassociate the highs and the lows. When a talk goes really well and I feel like I nailed it, it's one of my best performances ever, I make sure to celebrate that win, and I'm thankful and appreciative of the fact I did well, but I don't allow that to make me content. I don't think all of a sudden that I've arrived. I make sure I get back to level very quickly. And if I give a performance that I don't feel was as good as I'm capable of, or if I do mess up, the world's not going to end because of that. I have to learn from it. Many times just laugh it off and move on to the next rep. So for me, I just keep everything in perspective. I don't get too high. I don't get too low. I prepare to the best of my ability. I do the best that I'm capable of at that time, and just let the chips fall where they may. And I don't worry too bad or too much about pleasing other people. If a client's paying me a lot of money to come speak to their organization, out of respect, I owe it to them to prepare as fully as possible and be high energy and give them everything I have. But I'm not doing it for their validation or approval. I'm doing it because that's my job as a servant leader, is to do what they've paid me to do and do it to the best of my ability. And if I know that I've done that and I can look in the mirror and say, I prepared, I executed, and I did this as well as I was capable of, and I don't mean this to sound like a jerk, I'm not real worried about what the feedback is at that point. I knew that I did the best that I was capable of, and that's fine. And if some people loved it, that's great. If some people didn't, I can live with that if I know that I did the best I was capable of.
Yeah, there's a relentless optimism that should go hand in hand with the amount of preparation and hard work that you put into something. So I think a lot of people probably get caught up in their head about feeling that insecurity or letting that take over more than it should. And part of that could be due to lack of preparation. We're going to change gears here a little bit, Alan. So
Sure.
I'm going to say a word. I'm going to say a word here, and you can take it anywhere you want. You can tell a story. You can talk about how someone else embodies something about this word, or about your personal definition of it, wherever you want to take it. The word is grit.
Love the word grit, because there are a few words out there right now that I don't love. And one of them sounds very similar to grit, which is grind. I'm not a big believer in the grind. I know a lot of people are, and I don't say that to diminish their interpretation of it. Language is something we all interpret different, but I don't like the word grind. In fact, that's the last word I would want to describe my life. However, I love the word grit. I think it's kind of a healthy combination of optimism, of belief, of resilience. I know there's been several books out. I believe Angela Duckworth has written a book about it, that it's somewhat of a controllable factor, and yet it plays a tremendous role in our ability to be successful. So grit is something we have control over, and it's also like a muscle. Grit's something that can be improved as we condition ourselves to accept higher tolerances of it. But, as much as I don't want someone to describe my life as being a grind, I would be very flattered and honored if someone says, man, Alan has a lot of grit.
Let's go back a little bit. You're still the strength coach at DeMatha right now, and you're back at DeMatha and you're charged with teaching your athletes grit, how do you go about that? Let's assume the whole group has zero grit. They're the least grittiest team you've ever been around, and you're charged with instilling that. How do you do it?
I believe the first step to grit is acknowledging that there's only two things we have complete control over 100% of the time, and that's our own effort and our own attitude. And I would work relentlessly with them to condition them to the point that they're putting most of their physical, mental, and emotional resources into their own effort and their own attitude and not look external. And once you own the fact that not only is working hard a choice, but not working hard is also a choice by default. And once you own the fact that you don't control most of what goes on in the world, but you control how you respond and how you react and how you accept or receive feedback, then you've got the keys to the car. Then you're in control. And when you control your attitude and you control your effort and you make sure that everything you do moves you forward, then you've created a fertile environment to actually develop grit. But without acknowledging that you control your attitude and effort, grit is rather futile.
Absolutely. And where have you seen, because not every player that has grit or not every player that works with a great trainer is going to wind up being an NBA level talent. And you've worked with a lot of different athletes over your time. Tell me about one or two people, specifically if you can, or just speak in generalities about the type of person. But tell me about some athletes that were not the most tremendous on the court, but were really successful when they got done in some sort of business or in their workplace or even in their family. What about them as athletes were characteristics that have now run through into the rest of their life after their sport?
Well, what's neat for me, I'm 42 years old, so I'm at a perfect age now that a lot of the players that I started training when I was in my early 20s, I mean, obviously now they're adults and they do have their own families and they have their own businesses and they're in the working world. So I'm at a wonderful age to start seeing and reaping some of the benefits of enjoying seeing what they've been able to do. Two players stick out. One was a Japanese player named Tashi Ito, who was the point guard at Montrose Christian when Kevin Durant was there. And I mean, I tell you what, if you Google the word grit, at least if you're in Japan, this kid's name should come up in his picture because he's one of the grittiest players that I've ever met. He's respectful. He has one of the best work ethics. He had an incredibly high basketball IQ, but he was also an excellent student. He was selfless. I mean, that kid was absolutely remarkable. And genetically, 5'9", 5'10", Japanese born, which for the most part, we don't see a ton of really high-level basketball players that are Japanese born.
Similar build as Kevin Durant.
Yeah, so he wasn't blessed with tremendous athleticism, but you know what? He's still playing professionally to this day in Japan, and a lot of that is due to the fact that he has grit, that he's unselfish, he's the consummate glue guy and team player, that he puts others first, that he studies the game, that he does the little things like run the floor and dive on the floor and box out. He does everything. This kid is still playing basketball professionally a decade later when, in all reality, with what he was given at birth, he has no business playing professional basketball in Japan. But he's willed himself to do that because of grit. Another player, and I'll go to DeMatha on this one, was a kid named James Robinson, who was the all-time winningest player at DeMatha. He played varsity as a freshman. I believe he won 120 games in his 4 years at DeMatha. And he's playing alongside Victor Oladipo, Quinn Cook, Jeremy and Jerian Grant, Markelle Fultz, like all guys that are prominent NBA names. And James was always the motor behind those teams. He's one of the best leaders that I've ever met. He's one of the mentally and physically toughest kids that I've ever met. And one thing I'd say, right now as a professional speaker, I keep my team really lean. I have an agent and a director of operations, and I have somebody that serves as my admin assistant / helps me with all my digital stuff. So I keep my team very tight. But if Tashi Ito or James Robinson called me up this afternoon and said, Alan, do you have a job for me? I would find a job for either one of them. I would add them to my team, no questions asked, because of the type of value that I know they can bring to the table with just the type of high character, gritty people that they are.
That you're actually leading right into my next question. Why would you hire the captain of a championship team? And then on the flip side, why would you not hire an athlete? So the first one is from a business perspective, what benefits could there be in hiring an athlete? And then speak to the athletes about where they tend to get it wrong.
I believe winners are winners in every area of life, and especially those. This is not to detract anyone that was part of an individual sport. So this is nothing against golfers or tennis players or wrestlers. That's a different set of skills. But if you were very successful and winning on a team sport, then you more than likely possess characteristics like being coachable, having humility, being unselfish, understanding your role. And those are all types of attributes that if you want to be a part of a winning organization or business, that you need. So I'm a huge advocate of people hiring successful athletes. And I don't mean successful in the way that they scored a lot of points or they got a lot of rebounds. Successful in the fact that they were part of a team that won and they played their role to the best of their ability. I work with a group called Athlete Network, who I absolutely love. They've actually created a business on trying to be the liaison between businesses and former athletes and help match them up and get jobs. And they're a remarkable organization. They do great work, and that's what they do. They help people utilize the skills that they learned when they played their sport and let those transfer over to the business world. Now, if you were to ask me why I would not hire an athlete, for the first time in my life, I may have to just go silent on that because I can't think of a reason based on that. Now, certainly that doesn't mean that everybody's a good fit. And if somebody was not a team player on their sport, they were selfish, they weren't coachable, they were a cancer to the team, then clearly I wouldn't want to hire them. But that's not because they played a team sport, that's in spite of it. So generally speaking, when you find someone that was a great role player on a winning team, yeah, I would always make room in my organization to fit them in because I believe they'd only add value to the culture.
Awesome. We only have a couple questions left here, Alan, but you're giving some incredible wisdom here that I hope people are pulling out their notebook and pen if they haven't to be able to write some of this down, especially if there's the next question coming up. Pause it and grab your pen and paper if you need. Media, whether it's books, music, TV, movies, any source of influx of information, where do you get it from most? Who are the people that you follow, the leaders that you follow on different social accounts, and what sort of books and stuff have you been reading or listening to that have impacted your life?
Well, one, I try to be a voracious reader, and in all honesty, sometimes I do more reading than other times. But I'm always devouring information. I love podcasts. I mean, clearly, and I devour podcasts and audiobooks pretty regularly. So for me, I'm not as worried about where the information comes from as long as I'm accessing it and being open to it. My own personal preference, when I'm working out myself, I prefer to listen to music. I'm kind of an old school hip hop, old school rap guy from the 90s. So that's my preference. But anytime I'm commuting, anytime I'm in the car, anytime I'm on a flight, anytime I'm on a plane, I'm always listening to a podcast or to an audiobook. And I certainly don't do it every single day, but I try to either start or end my day, one or the other, with 30 minutes of reading from an actual tangible book. I'm not a big e-reader. That's just not my preference. I like to physically hold a book, turn the pages, and make a little dog ear, to mark my spot. But that's just preference. And I also try to look outside of my direct industry. So when I was in basketball, I didn't just study basketball coaches and basketball trainers. I would try to look outside to other areas. Same thing now that I'm more in the corporate world and in the speaking world. Perfect example. I believe stand-up comedians is about the most rawest form of being an orator that there is. And of course I like to laugh, but I actually study stand-up comedy because I believe it will make me a better professional speaker. I study their body language and their mannerisms and their physicality. I study their ability to pause and their tempo and the way that they change throughout a joke. I try to study all of these things, not just for the content. Again, I like to laugh, but more for how they approach their craft and how can I take some of these things and apply it to my craft. So I devour a ton on Netflix, stand-up comedies, documentaries, and even some series I watch, but I don't watch just to kind of float off into La La Land. I watch because I study the actors. I study the cinematography. I study all different areas that make that up, and it gives me a much stronger appreciation for what it is that I do. Since you asked specifically, what I've been on a kick lately is I've been reading a bunch of books on sales. I actually have a few here. They just happen to be sitting here. This one's called Exactly What to Say by my friend Phil Jones. I've got one here called Same Side Selling by my friend Ian Altman, and another one called Close Deals Faster by John Asher. And a lot of my clients are sales organizations and sales professionals. So in order for me to serve them to the highest level, I need to know as much about what they do as possible. I need to do the best I can to walk in their shoes and look through their lens. To me, the best compliment someone could get me after one of my talks at their organization would be to say something to the effect of, man, that dude really understands us. Man, that guy, Alan, he gets me. He understands what I'm going through. And that can only be done by doing your research and preparing. But what I found too in sales, you're not really trying to sell anything. You're actually trying to solve a problem. That's what sales is. Is trying to solve somebody's problem. So I found that by reading these sales books, there's tons of information in there that will make you better as an active listener, that will make you better at relationships and connecting, whether it's with your spouse or your children or a friend or with a business colleague. So there's lots of things that can be pulled out of sales books that can be applied to coaching. And then, of course, I make sure that I look in my toolbox from coaching and apply that to sales. So this stuff can all be intertwined. If anyone follows me on social media, at Alan Stein Jr., just go check out who I follow. And those are the people that I respect and folks that I know that I can continually learn from.
Way cool. Yeah, there's a lot of good, tangible, useful things there that people can grab and go put into their own life. I'm going to steal another quote of yours. I know this is a big one. For those of you that don't know this, Alan gave a talk. It was a TEDx talk, and the title of it was Be Where Your Feet Are. Without giving the whole speech over again, which I'm sure took a lot of preparation, touch on what you mean by that. What does that mean when you say be where your feet are?
Well, I always believe in giving credit where credit's due. And I know that statement, be where your feet are, I've heard Nick Saban from Alabama say it, and I've heard Oprah Winfrey say it. I don't know if either of them came up with it or if they learned it from someone else or just two brilliant minds happened to use it at the same time. But it wasn't until after I started using it that I realized that was kind of in my subconscious, because I thought it was something that I came up with until I went back and heard it from other places. And it was probably something that I seeped in my subconscious through reading or watching a video. But really the whole point of being where your feet are means to be in the present moment. That wherever your feet are, if your feet are in the room, then your head and your heart need to be in the room as well. So if you're with your kids, then be with your kids. Don't be distracted by your phone or thinking about the phone call you have to make the next day. Be fully present and be where your feet are. And for me, that's incredibly challenging to do on a very regular basis, as I imagine it is for a lot of your listeners. But it's something that all of us need to strive to do, that we'll do everything in our life at a higher level and with more satisfaction and fulfillment if we're fully present and we learn to be where our feet are.
Fully engaged. I love that. There's a lot of detached relationships that you see failing over and over. And I think that holds true in business, but also in sports, especially in sports and in the culture of phone face, where you quite frequently don't even see people making eye contact of all the little things. And I was a rhetorician and a communications guy in college, so that stuff was all big for me as well. And just to see in my 3 short years of coaching, how difficult it is even to try to teach the basics of communicating interpersonally between people. And I think that's so important, being where your feet are and being engaged in the moment. That can take you a long way.
Well, as a coach, and I learned this very early as a coach, that you need to connect first and coach second. They have to be done in that order. Connect first, coach second. And connection, it all starts with trust. But how do you build trust is through communication. And the often overlooked part of communication is listening, but not just listening, active listening. So if you want to improve your relationship with anyone, if you want to improve your connection, if you want to build trust, if you want to be able to really get to them so you can coach them to the highest level, then you need to become a world-class active listener. You need to connect and listen to learn, not listen to reply. Ask certain questions, but then ask insightful follow-up questions and dig deeper. Very similar to what you're doing with this interview, but these are things that need to be done on a very regular basis with those that we want to establish connections with. Because one thing that I did learn in my coaching career, I had a very good understanding of movement mechanics and physiology, and I understood training. But what I think I did fairly well was establish connections with my players so that they inherently trusted me and they were willing to go through severe amounts of physical, mental, and emotional discomfort because they trusted me and they believed in me. So would I say that I could design the best program ever? No, of course not. there's folks that could run circles around me from an anatomy and physiology and biomechanics standpoint, but I was pretty good at establishing that connection, which got my players to work hard and stay focused consistently.
Yeah, they work synergistically. You can have all the knowledge in the world, but if you can't coach it or teach it, it doesn't matter. I think those are really good thoughts, Alan. Those are things that I think a lot of coaches and athletes could benefit from. We only have time here for probably one question and then your final thought.
Okay.
So one of the things that I really wanted to ask you, because I know that being an athlete yourself, working with athletes, and then also being around the athletics world, you know how competitive it is. What kind of advice would you give your younger self, maybe back to age 12 or 13, going into your own playing career and then also advising yourself through the rest of your career? What would you be telling yourself?
Well, first of all, I probably wouldn't listen to myself because I was pretty stubborn and hard-headed back then. So the first thing, hopefully, I would tell myself was, hey, boy, you don't know everything. So to being open to other ways, I mean, I know even when I first started in the training business, I came up through an ideology and methodology called high-intensity training, HIT, H-I-T. And it's very different than a lot of conventional training methods. And I basically put blinders on and thought, hey, this is the only way to do it. It's HIT or nothing. And anyone else is wrong. And that's a very narrow-minded approach when there's so many different portions of other methodologies that are incredibly useful, beneficial, and helpful. So being open-minded would be one. I do know that when I was younger, I have the appreciation for the process that I have now. I was much more outcome-based. I wanted the outcomes and I wanted the results, but didn't always understand that the best way to get those was going through the process. And that's certainly a big part of it. And then the last thing I tell myself is stop playing the comparison game. Like, don't compare yourself to anybody else because it's just not worth it. And you'll always lose that game. I mean, if you're an athlete, no matter who you are, there'll always be somebody a little bigger, a little stronger, a little faster, a little more skilled, has a little higher IQ, all the way. I mean, look at that now. What LeBron James doing right now or this past, several years is absolutely remarkable. I mean, he is a once in a generation type of player. And even though he's doing everything he can't escape the ghost of someone saying, well, you're still not as good as Jordan. No matter how awesome he is, he still can't escape that. So you just can't play the comparison game. Even now as an adult and a professional speaker, if I walked outside right now, within 60 seconds, I could find someone with a nicer car, a better apartment, who gets paid more than I do, who has better speaking gigs than I do. Like, it's just not worth it. So I don't let those extrinsic measure give me validation or lower or raise my own self-esteem and my own self-worth. I go back to what it is that I can control. And I say that very matter-of-factly, but it's really tough. I mean, I find myself playing the comparison game. I find myself seeing, a colleague post on social media that they just spoke at this amazing event. And I think, damn, how come I didn't get to speak at that event? And it starts to drum up some insecurity. It starts to drum up some jealousy. But at least now I have the awareness to know that insecurity and jealousy and comparison will never serve me well. So I can nip it in the bud really quick now instead of letting it fester and actually change my behavior. So every once in a while, those things still rear their ugly head with me, but now I'm able to get them at bay very, very quickly. And I'm much happier because of it.
That level of self-awareness has got to be so important in the process. And I think a lot of people have a hard time with that, but you never know. Maybe just hearing it on the show or hearing it from you, Alan, is just enough for people to be able to take it seriously.
Well, right. Think about this right now. I think this has been an amazing conversation. You've done a tremendous job guiding this and asking very insightful questions. This conversation, I believe, is valuable whether 10 people listen to it or 10,000 people listen to it. So we can't allow ourselves to feel like our worth is dependent upon how popular this gets or if this goes viral or how many people listen, because that part is out of our control and it doesn't matter. You and I both prepared for this interview. We both executed it to the best of our ability. And for that, we should be proud and continue to take those kind of steps for future opportunities. But again, whether there's 10 people right now hearing my voice or 10,000 or 10 million, it doesn't really matter. We're doing what we can to the best of our ability.
Yeah, that's really, really good. I will, on behalf of my 7 million strong audience, tell you that we need to go ahead and reevaluate some of those numbers. But I think impact does not discriminate based on audience size, and it could be one-on-one. It could be Tony Robbins, right? It could be someone who's seeing thousands or millions of people a year, or it could be one singular coach who happens to have an impact on a player one night in a gym. But those singular moments, those step-by-step times, those reps are really all that matters in the long run.
Yeah. I'll tell you this, and I don't know that I've ever told this story publicly, but one of the worst clinics that I ever did was because I didn't have that mindset. I was actually at a clinic, and I'm not going to say where, but there were probably 1,500 people in the stands. So I was jacked up. I was so excited because I was going to be a speaker a little bit later in the afternoon. And what ended up happening was there was a rules committee meeting that wasn't necessarily mandatory, but it was something the coaches were highly encouraged to go to. And it was taking place when I was going to be speaking. So I went from thinking I'm going to be this rock star in front of 1,500 coaches to maybe 50 hung around. I mean, it was like a trampling of coaches that left to go to this other meeting. And there I was in this gym with 50 coaches. And I remember being so dejected and so down. I did an awful job. And it wasn't till later that I had the maturity to go, man, you just let an opportunity slip by. You had a chance to serve and pour into 50 other people, and you didn't take it. You were focused more on the people that weren't there than the people that were there. And as a coach, as a speaker, as a clinician, that's completely unacceptable. So I certainly feel bad for the 50 people that were there because they didn't get my best. But thankfully, it taught me a lesson that I've carried with me since.
Well, it's always a learning opportunity because now you're able to go back and coach someone. If you were the coach on side stage to yourself as a speaker right now, you'd be able to look at yourself or look at someone who you're going to mentor and going to help in this life currently. And you could look across and say, you know what? Those 50 people in the stands, blow their socks off right now. Your experience, yeah, especially with the platform that you're building for yourself, your experience will be able to serve those people. So again, Alan, this is the last thing you gotta answer here. And this is always a tough one because you've probably used and exhausted all of your good one-liners, even though I know you got a whole pocket full of them. Waking thought. You have 10 seconds to send a message to everyone right when their alarm goes off in the morning. What would you tell people first thing?
This is the only chance you have it today. This is it. This is today, this date, this exact time will only happen one time. Certainly there'll be other days of the week that will seem similar to this, but this is your only chance today. So do your best to get the most out of it. It's funny. I actually have a kind of a routine that I do in the evening that's very similar to what you just asked. And it's basically a rhetorical question, but right before you go to sleep, ask yourself, say, look, I just traded 24 hours of my life for what I got out of today. Am I cool with that trade? And to me, that's incredibly powerful to ask yourself, are you cool with that trade? Now, of course, there are going to be days where we're not at our best. We don't perform very well. We're very unproductive. Wasn't the best day you've ever had. The key is just not letting a bunch of those string together. That would be a problem. So yeah, in the morning, what I would say is today only comes once, but also think about your goals, whether it's a monthly or yearly or 5-year goal. And you need to think, what can I do today to get me just a little bit closer to that goal? That's ultimately what it means to live in the present moment and to be focused on the process. What can I do today to get me closer to that goal and then get that thing done?
Awesome. That was a long 10 seconds though, Alan.
I didn't know I only had 10 seconds.
Man, I thank you so much for coming on. This was a tremendous episode. The amount of wisdom and the knowledge bombs you're dropping on these coaches and players that are listening, I think that this is going to be something that people can take with them. They can actually carry, they can hold. You're doing a tremendous job in your speaking. I've been following along. Full disclosure, I've been a fan for a little while just from a basketball skills standpoint. I got hurt at one point in college. My first 2 years were medical hardships. And at the time, you were one of the only guys in the field that had put out a couple of videos on doing some living room style exercises. And meanwhile, here, me on my crutches, you were someone I looked up to. So from that point forward, I've kind of always kept up and followed along. And really, there's a lot of people that will go through some of the process that you have and fall off. But it's really cool to see some of the success that you're having. and the fact that you've continued to push to try to have an impact. I think you have a great message to send, and I appreciate you coming to share it on our show.
No, I appreciate that. So I'm assuming when my book comes out, you're going to buy 1,000 copies. Thank you.
Yeah.
Despite the fact you gave me specific directions of 10 seconds, and despite the fact that I swore I turned off my dryer before this started, and we just heard the damn thing buzz twice. So like everybody listening to this, I'm flawed. I'm still under construction. I'm still trying to figure all this stuff out. I sincerely appreciate your support and those kind words. Thoughts like that you just shared are what drive me to continue to do this. I mean, for me, it's about making impact with other people, because there have been so many people in my life, you mentioned even Jay Billis, just being one of them, who have poured back into me and have really helped me. So anytime I feel that I've been able to do that for someone else, it motivates me to keep going, and it's an incredibly satisfying feeling. So I thank you for your kind words and for the opportunity to talk to your 7 million listeners.
You'll be just fine selling your book if I have 7 million listeners. So, all right, Alan, I really appreciate it, man. Team, we'll talk to you guys later. We'll see you next week. Team, don't go anywhere just yet. Give me 1 second. This will be brief. Number one, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode. It means the world to me that you're taking the time out of your day and you see value in our show. So I'm going to continue to improve and continue to bring you good guests that are inspiring and that are willing to share their stories with you so that you can learn from them. Second thing, if at any point you have a suggestion, please feel free to reach out. My email is jacob, Jakob, @myc.team. Lastly, and probably most importantly, we have to game the algorithm. I know that it doesn't seem like a big deal, but the truth is there's a lot of junk out there on the internet. And if we want people to be able to see good information like this that's actually making people's lives better, I need each and every one of you to like, subscribe, share, post on people's walls, and especially word of mouth. Spread the message. All of our socials are at the MYC Study, and the website is themycstudy.com. Tell your friends, tell your coaches, tell your teammates to go ahead and check out the MYC Study. I think that there's a lot of great information and wisdom that these guests have been bringing people, and it's only going to get better because I'm going to continue to grow as a host as well. So all of you that are part of this MYC community, go forth and master your craft. I'll see you guys next week.